Cortez and Julia Salazar, among others. We are seeing themes of Occupy Wall Street once again as campaign slogans that are galvanizing voters and shaping public opinion. What's different, however, is that these ideas are not theoretical. They are laser focused and politically achievable. Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, and restoring Glass-Steagall. In this era of post-Citizens United, what was originally thought of as political suicide, a campaign that rejected corporate PAC money while not apologizing for having true progressive ideals, can emerge victorious. So that's what I think is amazing. Like now, real, true progressive ideals are coming into electoral politics. Occupy was really responsible for that. Occupy allowed Bernie Sanders to walk through the door. Woo! Yeah! This is the ironic yet beautiful lesson of Occupy. The movement never wanted nor intended to walk through the halls of political power, but years later its spirit lives on, ubiquitously influencing the national progressive agenda and perhaps dominating elections in the future. I'll always recall a sign when the protesters were getting kicked out of the park. It said, "You cannot evict an idea." How true that is today. So, yeah. So anyways, I just also want to say, it's a number of people here, a number of political people here that have been influenced by Occupy. Occupy does not endorse any political candidates, but let's be real. I mean, Occupy is influencing politics today, and that's really where I think the spirit, the movement should move on into electoral politics and other mechanisms. Like number one thing to really pressure the system. Get on the ballot. Get on the ballot, you influence the conversation, you really pressure the system. Also groups like Refuse Fascism, Rise and Resist, a lot of those protest groups are still really, really important. They're also influencing the conversation. But anyways, thank you guys all for being here. I think it's amazing. And Norman Siegel, take it away. Norman, we were trying to get backup dancers, but will you hold this while you're speaking?
I was asked to hold the mic. First of all, I want to thank Marnie for pulling this together, and for the people who are here from Occupy who have come back. I thank everybody. Very few people in New York knew who John Zuccotti was. Didn't even know there was a park named for him called Zuccotti Park. But 7 years ago, something very special happened in this area. Was it messy? You bet. Was it eclectic? You bet. Was it noisy? Yes. They will always do something to drown us out. 20 years ago, I could speak over that. As I get older, I got to come closer. So I was saying, was it messy? Was it eclectic? Was it noisy? You bet. But folks, that's what democracy is all about. And what you had here is a very eclectic group of people who were compassionate and idealistic. That sign, I think, sums it up. Another world is possible. The people who came here, from my perspective, were about freedom and justice and equality and fairness for all, not some. Perhaps when the historians and the journalists write about Occupy Wall Street, September 17, 2011, et al., it was the first time, although there were historians and economic people who wrote and studies that were on the shelves about income inequality. This was the first time it became mainstream. It was the first time when people framed the issue 99%ers versus the 1%ers. The argument was very clear, and it reverberated throughout not only New York, but America and the world. It was about, wait a minute, how can you have a constitutional democratic government when in fact 1% owns most of the wealth? How did that happen? And how do we ameliorate that? I remember a politician who came here, listened to it once or twice, and then ran for mayor on that income inequality. Unfortunately, once that person got in, he forgot about income inequality across the board. Too many of our politicians do that. What was nice about Occupy, it was pure. People were not doing it as stepping stones for political office. If there was a result of that, terrific. But what were the principles and values? Freedom. Freedom of speech. To get up here without mics and have a mic talk back and people say what they believed in their heart and in their brain. Freedom of the press, especially in the Trump era today, where fake press, we need a free press. And there were people here who were streamlining so people could see everything. Justice. Before I go on, freedom to protest. Unfortunately, I get here this morning, and sure enough, we got cops at different places. There's no need for those cops here. This is a peaceful protest. But they stereotype us. They are threatened by us. Why are they threatened by us? We believe in democratic principles. But we recognize that people had a right to protest under the First Amendment, and we were going to do it regardless of what the government was trying to do and shut us down. Justice. When the police were abusive, people put a spotlight on it. I remember one particular thing, and I had a personal involvement as a civil rights lawyer. When the government shut it down, think of this. There were hundreds of books in the library here. And what did they do? They took the books and they threw it in garbage trucks. They destroyed books. Historically, if you think about what governments destroyed books, New York City did that back in 2011. We should never forget that. And we went to court, and we did prevail. And equality, perhaps another one of the legacies of Occupy Wall Street. Racial equality, Black Lives Matter. That was part of the theme here. Gender equality, the Me Too movement, it's time today. There was a recognition that women should be treated equally to us guys. That fight goes on too. Sexual orientation, sexual preference, that was a fight here too, the LGBT community. And in those movements, whether it's the civil rights movement for race, for the women's movement, I was this weekend up in Seneca Falls, unbelievable, 1848, the Women's Convention, to achieve eventually, years later, in 1920, the right for women to vote. It's incomprehensible to us today that it took that long for women to be given that right to vote. And still, women aren't equal in pay, in government. That has to change too. So the struggle for equality, whether it's income equality, racial, gender, sexual equality, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while. Talk to the African American community, talk to the LGBT community, talk to the women's community. So anyone who thinks that Occupy Wall Street is over doesn't understand what movements and social change and political and economic change are about. I stand here today, as Marnie said too, that the spirit of Occupy Wall Street is still alive. It's in here and it's up here. And we, the advocates, the people who believe in freedom, justice, and equality, we're not going to be quiet. We're going to continue to talk, especially in the Trump era. Since November of 2016, I wear resist. What does that mean? That means we challenge, we object, and where necessary, We resist government policies and practices that are inconsistent with what American principles and values are supposed to be about. Read the Declaration of Independence. Read the Constitution. That sets forth the roadmap for how we take on people who abuse our rights. We need to look at the midterm elections. We need to then look at our Constitution and find in the roadmap what you do when you have autocratic government, when you have people in government who are not doing what the Constitution requires and what we the people need and want. Don't give up. Don't give up. I learned when I went south in the 60s in the Southern Civil Rights Movement. I say Southern because America still hasn't had its civil rights movement. It's good to be smart. The most important ingredient is stamina. You got to outlast the opponents. And so, as Dr. King always said, come together in the beloved community, and we shall, yes, we shall overcome someday. Thank you. Occupied, the spirit lives on. Thank you all.
Thank you, Norman. Thank you. Okay, and now, Howie Hawkins.
I feel like shouting mic check. But I don't want to do the whole speech like that because can you hear me? Okay, I'm Howie Hawkins. I'm the Green Party candidate for governor of New York, but I'm here because I'm a veteran occupier. And as I reflect on this anniversary, there are two things come to mind. One is you never know when you start something that it's going to be the event that changes history. And I can tell you this as somebody who started in a lot of movements that were a small minority. In 66 and 67, those of us opposed to the war in Vietnam were a small minority. And we were a majority a few years later. The anti-nuclear power movement, the anti-apartheid divestment sanctions movement, right on down to getting the ban on fracking after the campaigns in 2014. And what happened with Occupy, I was part of a group, Margaret Flowers, Kevin Zeese in Washington, D.C. We're looking at the Arab Spring and the occupations of Tahrir Squares, Freedom Squares, and that Egyptian occupation inspired us. So in April of 2011, we said, come to Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C. on October 6th, which was the anniversary of this never-ending war that got started in Afghanistan and the beginning of Obama's austerity budget that year. And then a few months later, Adbusters said, come to Wall Street on a couple weeks earlier than October 6th. And we saw that, great. We're going to Freedom Plaza. Well, by the time we got to Freedom Plaza, we were now part of Occupy that started here. And that's what I mean. You agitate, you talk to people, and then at some point, it's the right time, the right place, and the people come. Now remember why this took off. The police pinned those young women and maced them gratuitously. And people all over the country were outraged. And now express not just bad police, but a bad system for whom they work. Because the 1% is headquartered here. So first lesson is, don't give up, keep agitating, and we will make progress. The second lesson that Occupy brought to our movements was the class issue. The 1% versus the 99%. It suddenly became legitimate to target this 1% who in this city in 1980 got 12% of all the income. Today they get 41%. 10 years after the crash. And what were we chanting? Banks got bailed out. We got sold out. And that's where we are right now. But we have new currents coming forward. Marnie asked me to say the impact on the Greens. Greens, a lot of us come out of peace and environmental movements, and the class question was kind of difficult. Not after Occupy. It legitimized it, and the Greens are clear on that now. So what has also come forward? We got people that aren't really socialists calling themselves socialists. We got a majority of Democrats, according to public opinion polls, saying, oh, socialism may be a good idea. A majority of millennials. And we had a saying in the 1960s, the issue is not the issue is the system. Because under capitalism, wealth concentrates, and that translates into concentrated political power. So we got a two-party system, which is slicker than the old Soviet one-party state. It's a two-party state with two government parties that preside over the concentration of wealth into the hands of the 1%. And we think we got a choice. That's why it's slicker. It's like Boss Tweed used to say, you can vote for anybody you want as long as I get to pick the candidates. So the primaries are pre-chosen by the money primary. And those that get the money then get into the primary. And then you get a choice. The rich are behind a few candidates, and you get to pick among the ones they chose. And then you go to the general election. So before the game even gets started, they've already pre-chosen your options. But people are getting wise to this game. And they're talking about system change. And until we have economic democracy based on social ownership of the major means of production, whether it's worker co-ops in the private sector or public enterprises like NYCHA, MTA, NYPA, the New York Power Authority, are democratized so they answer to the constituents like the tenants in housing and the workers in those enterprises, so that in the worker co-ops we get the full fruit of our labor. It doesn't go to absentee owners as profits, but the full value, we get our share according to the labor contributed. And in the public sector, it's supposed to operate at public benefit at cost rather than for private profit. But if it's not democratic, they use the able to get on the agenda. So remember, the issue is not the issue is the system, and we need system change. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, this is Sansara from Refuse Fascism.
Hi, thank you, Marnie. Yeah. Okay, so I am very proud. My name is Sansara Taylor. I am a supporter of the Revolutionary Communist Party and a follower of Bob Avakian and the New Communism. And I'm also proud to say I was part of Occupy. I spent a lot of time down here 7 years ago and in the days and weeks that followed. And I also want to say that the impetus that led to Occupy, the howling and profound inequalities in this world, not just in this country but on a global scale, have not only persisted but grown worse. Today we live in a world where the 42 richest people on the planet control more wealth than half of humanity. 3.7 billion people. We live in a world where 82% of the global wealth is controlled by 1% of the population on a world scale. So I am here to say, not only was Occupy righteous in standing up and calling this out, but the outrages that Occupy fought against continue to need to be fought and defeated. And in this light, I think as we are upholding the spirit of Occupy, we also need to uphold the debate and the spirit of wrangling that opened up. And I want to bring out something that I brought into this occupation 7 years ago with others, and I want to read an excerpt from it. This is a very prescient and insightful statement. I'm going to read just a part of it from the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian, who is commenting on Occupy. And he upheld the profound positive role of this movement, but he also said, and I think these words ring even more true today when you look back on it, he said, the idea or ideal, which at this point has considerable currency among many involved in or supportive of these protests, that a horizontal, as opposed to a hierarchical movement, can in and of itself serve as a means of major social change, and perhaps even a model of a different society. This idea or ideal does not and cannot measure up to the reality of what is actually required to fundamentally uproot and transform society, and indeed the world, marked by profound inequalities and relations of exploitation and oppression within every single country and in the world as a whole, divided between imperialist powers and the vast third world dominated by these imperialist powers. To uproot and transform all this requires nothing less than an unprecedented revolution, a radical overturning of the entrenched and violently repressive ruling forces and imperial powers who now dominate human social existence, and the deep-seated economic, social, and political relations of exploitation and oppression of which they are the embodiment and the enforcers. And to achieve this radical revolution, we need science and we need a scientific approach to making revolution. And so today, as the inequalities, the injustices, the global exploitation that Occupy called out rages even more intensely than years ago, and at a time when in this country, the top dog on the imperialist food chain, we now have a fascist regime in power. A openly white supremacist Trump-Pence fascist regime, an openly misogynist and hatefully Christian fascist bigoted regime, a regime that is threatening the world with nuclear weapons and environmental catastrophe. It is more important than ever before that people come back in the streets, stand up and rely on ourselves to resist, not the mechanisms of power, the official channels in this country, but the power of the people in the streets. And that more than ever we get into what it will really take to end this. So I want to challenge and invite all of you up this Sunday to Revolution Books. We are premiering and previewing a new film, a speech by Bob Avakian getting into why we need an actual revolution, why this system cannot be reformed, why you cannot get a few reforms, a few laws passed, or a new face in power. You need to overturn the whole system. You need to radically make a full revolution. And in this speech, Bob Avakian tackles the most challenging question that has vexed revolutionaries and freedom fighters in this country for generations and around the world, which is how a revolution could actually be made in a country as powerful as this one. This is what cries out to be done. This is what humanity needs from us at this dark hour, and this is possible. Come up to Revolution Books this Sunday, 4 o'clock, 132nd and Malcolm X Boulevard in Harlem. Get back in the streets. Raise your voices. Do not stop. In the name of humanity, we must defy those in power. We must resurrect the spirit of Occupy and go much further and actually win. Thank you, sisters and brothers.
Thank you. And Lisa, introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Talk loud.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa Fithian, and I was here the day we took Liberty Plaza on September 17th, 7 years ago, and it was a beautiful thing. One of the things that Occupy taught us was never doubt that marginalized people can change the world. We've seen it with the First Nations rising up to save the planet since Standing Rock. We've seen the Black Lives Matter movement emerging to help us all reclaim our humanity. When Trump put kids in cages, the Latino community rose up, and with allies, all of a sudden, ICE across the countries were being occupied. The movement here inspired new generations, captured the imagination, changed the national debate, and opened a space for where another world is not only possible, it was now. On this very ground that we stand on today, we built a community that knew how to love one another, that fed one another, took care of our health needs, made sure we had books to read, took care of our children, everything, and cleaned the park, made sure we had the clean facilities we needed to be healthy and whole. When we live in this culture of power over that is breeding death and destruction, destroying our humanity, taking our livelihood every day, without these models and moments and movements of life and inspiration, we would have little hope left. But Occupy changed that, as has every other movement that has been willing to throw down. And the one thing I want to say about Occupy that was also important and essential to remember, we were not afraid to take direct action. We were not afraid to take and hold space. We were not afraid to say, shut it down. Whether it's Wall Street, corporate lawyers, banks, the police. There's no room in our world for that violence against our humanity. And it means we have to stand up and fight back. We have a long way to go in this country. We walk in the legacy and the footsteps of many, many movements before us. And our ancestors are with us. And we can see what has been growing. More and more people are waking up. You know, the radicals, we got to get more back in the game. The liberals are rising up, bless their hearts, as they say in the South. But everybody in this next period, like I'll just say right now, I'm going down to D.C. on Thursday because the Kavanaugh confirmation has got to be shut the fuck down. I mean, this is serious stuff. We can't just, there's no one way. There's many places we have to fight, from the streets to the halls of power. We have to stop throwing each other under the bus. There's not enough of us. We don't have the resources, but together, our imagination, our hearts, our creativity, the gifts we all bring, change the world. And we're doing it every day. I'm just so lucky to feel like I got to be in New York on this anniversary. I didn't even sort of realize it until this morning, and I was like, I've got to be there. I'm actually leaving the city as soon as I'm done here. But I want to say that, you know, wherever we are in this country, whatever community we are in, there are kindred spirits that are fighting back. And this is a global movement. And I just, the solidarity we've had with one another, the victories for working class people, for those homeowners that lost their home, for the Latinos who've been, you know, encaged, for the Muslims who've been tried to be banned, from the black folks who face police violence every day, from the indigenous people who continue to face genocide. Right, this is all real. And those of us with white skin privilege, we have to continue to do what we can to keep our skin in the game, because our liberation is bound to everyone else's. We are as sick from white supremacy as we ourselves enact it every day. Everybody get out of your homes, get into the streets, rise up, fight back, occupy, shut shit down, and we are going to make a better world every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica. So I just want to say, landlords and developers are very